June 12th, 2025. It is 4:15 in the morning on the northeast side of San Antonio, and the westbound frontage road of Loop 410 is filling with water from underneath. 3.98 inches of rain have fallen on this city in the last hour. It is the heaviest hour ever recorded here. Badle Creek, a small concrete channel that most people drive over without ever noticing it, has turned into a chute, and in the dark, 14 or 15 cars go into it. The people inside them are commuters. It is a Thursday. They are on their way to work. 13 people die in San Antonio that night, 11 of them inside a stretch of highway shoulder about a mile and a half long. You have almost certainly never heard about it. 3 weeks later, the Guadalupe River rose 32 feet in 90 minutes. A summer camp upstream lost 27 girls and counselors. And the flood on the frontage road vanished from the country's memory completely. But the frontage road is the real story, because the deadliest county in Texas for people who drown in vehicles is not out on some famous river. It is Bexar County, San Antonio. And the third deadliest in the state is Travis County, Austin. Two of the fastest growing cities in America were built directly on top of the deadliest flood zone in the United States. To understand why two of the fastest growing cities in America sit inside the deadliest flood zone in the country, you have to go back long before either city existed, to a crack in the ground. It is called the Balcones Escarpment. A geologist named Robert Hill gave it that name in 1890. It is a fault zone several miles wide, and it runs in a long curve across the state of Texas, from Del Rio in the southwest all the way northeast to the Red River. At Del Rio, the step in the land stands about 1,000 feet high. By the time it reaches the stretch between San Antonio and Austin, it has settled to about 300 feet. It separates the high, dry Edwards Plateau from the coastal plains below, and it is the reason the springs are there. Barton Springs, San Marcos Springs, Como Springs. People built towns at those springs because the water was reliable, and the towns became cities, and the cities grew into each other along a single highway. Today, that corridor holds roughly 5 million people. The Austin metropolitan area passed 2.5 million in 2024 and was growing faster than almost any large metro in the country. San Antonio is close to 2.8 million. Between them runs Interstate 35, and beneath them both runs the same escarpment. Meteorologists have a name for the band of land that follows it. They call it Flash Flood Alley. It is a crescent that starts west of San Antonio, curves up through Austin and Waco, and ends east of Dallas. It is the most flash flood-prone region in the United States, and the people who study it do not describe it as a place where floods are likely. They describe it as a place where floods are fast. Here's the mechanism, and it takes about 90 seconds to explain. Warm, wet air comes inland off the Gulf of Mexico. It moves north and west across flat coastal country, carrying an enormous amount of water vapor. Then it runs into the escarpment. The land steps up, and the air has nowhere to go but up with it. Rising air cools. Cooling air cannot hold its moisture. The moisture falls. That alone would make this a rainy place. What makes it a deadly one is what the rain lands on. The Edwards Plateau is capped with a thick sequence of Cretaceous limestone. Over that limestone sits a layer of soil that in many places is only inches deep, and in a dry summer that soil bakes hard. Rain does not soak into hard, thin soil over rock. It runs. The slopes are steep. The stream channels are narrow, and they converge inside tight valleys. The water has one direction to go, and it gets there almost immediately. This is why Central Texas holds rainfall records that sound like typographical errors. In September of 1921, the town of Thrall recorded 38.2 inches of rain in 24 hours. Roughly 32 of those inches fell in 12. In August of 1978, as the remnants of Tropical Storm Amelia stalled over the hill country, more than 48 inches fell near the town of Medina. That is still the American record for point rainfall over 72 hours. And there is a cruel wrinkle. Drought does not protect this region. It loads it. When the soil has been baked for months, it sheds water even faster than usual. In the summer of 2025, the counties that were about to flood had been in drought since late 2021, the second longest unbroken drought stretch in the modern record. Medina Lake was down to just above 2% full. The Edwards Aquifer had fallen below a threshold it had not crossed since 1993. The ground was as ready as it could possibly be. Almost everything you have heard about Texas floods happens on a river, out in the country at a camp. The deadliest single stretch of ground in this story is a highway frontage road inside the 7th largest city in America. On the afternoon of June 11th, 2025, the National Weather Service issued a flood watch for the hill country and for Interstate 35 north of Austin. San Antonio was not included. At 17 minutes past 9 that evening, forecasters extended the watch south to cover the San Antonio metro area, with an internal note that read, "There's a growing signal that storms with intense rainfall rates will develop farther south than previously thought." At 29 minutes past 11, the first flash flood warning went out for the northwest corner of Bexar County. At 12:40 in the morning, another one for the northeast corner. And then, between 10 minutes before 3 and 10 minutes before 4 in the morning, 3.98 inches of rain fell on San Antonio International Airport in a single hour. It was the heaviest hour of rain in that station's record going back to 1934, when automated measurement began. More rain in 60 minutes than the city usually gets in a month. Northeast of the airport, a creek called Beidle Creek runs down toward Loop 410 near the Interstate 35 interchange. Where it reaches the highway, the natural creek bed narrows into a concrete-lined channel and turns south, running parallel to Perrin-Beidle Road. And along that channel, tucked down in a low spot, runs the westbound frontage road. At 2 minutes before 4 in the morning, the Weather Service issued a flash flood warning covering that specific area. 17 minutes later, the calls start. It is 4:15 in the morning on June 12, 2025, and dispatchers in San Antonio are taking reports of vehicles stranded on the Loop 410 access road near Perrin-Beidle. It is dark. It is a Thursday. The people in those cars are on their way to work. The water in Beidle Creek is not behaving like a creek. It is behaving like a chute. The concrete channel that was built to move water past the highway is doing exactly that, and the sag in the frontage road beside it is filling from below and from the side at the same time. Drivers who reach the low spot find the road gone. Drivers behind them cannot see that anything is wrong until they are in it. 14 or 15 vehicles are swept off that road. Some of them come to rest against the Perrin-Beidle Bridge. One red car is found wrapped around a concrete pillar. At least one is carried all the way to where Beidle Creek runs into Salado Creek. The people who get out of their cars are pulled downstream in the dark and grab whatever they can reach. Trees, bushes. The San Antonio Fire Department sets up at the Briar Glen Trailhead, west of where Perrin-Beidle crosses the creek, and starts pulling people out of the brush. They rescue 10. 2 more get themselves out. 4 of those 12 go to the hospital with minor injuries. The others do not come out. Their bodies are recovered between half a mile and 1 1/3 miles downstream. By the time the rain stops, 6.11 inches have fallen on the city, the 10th wettest day in San Antonio since 1885. 13 people are dead. 11 of them died along a stretch of highway frontage road about 1.5 miles long. They were not campers. They were not tourists. They were commuters, and the flood found them on the way to work. 3 weeks later, the same physics found a place the whole country would learn the name of. On the night of July 3rd, 2025, the remnants of Tropical Storm Barry drifted north out of Mexico and met a small, spinning pocket of low pressure over central Texas. The two of them locked together over the headwaters of the Guadalupe River and stopped moving. The Weather Service saw it coming in general terms. A flood watch went out for Kerr County that afternoon, warning of 1 to 3 inches, with isolated spots closer to 5 to 7. At 10 minutes past 6 that evening, the National Weather Prediction Center wrote that hourly rainfall in excess of 2 to 3 inches seemed reasonable, and that localized 6-hour totals over 6 inches would be possible. Across the night, 22 separate alerts of escalating severity went out for that area, but the storm did not deliver 6 inches. In places, it delivered 10 to 12 inches in 6 hours, and localized totals ran past 20. Federal analysts later found that the rainfall exceeded the 1 in 1,000-year threshold. And here is what that meant on the ground. At 5 past 4 in the morning on July 4th, the river gauge at Hunt read 21.99 feet. It had come up more than 10 feet in an hour. At 10 past 5, it read 37.52 feet and stopped transmitting because it had been destroyed. That reading was an all-time record for Hunt, past the mark set in 1932. Downstream at Kerrville, between 5:15 and 6:45, the Guadalupe rose 32.5 feet in 90 minutes. Major flood stage there is 20 feet. It went from under 2 feet to over 34. The flash flood emergency naming Hunt was issued at 3 minutes past 4 in the morning. The river reached major flood stage at Hunt at 5 minutes past 4. For the people in the lowest cabins along that stretch, the highest level warning the American weather system can issue, and the arrival of the water happened in the same minute. 237 people were pulled out alive that day, and 167 of them by helicopter, off roofs, and out of trees. The last live rescue was made on July 4th. Nobody was found alive after the first day. 10 years before either of those floods, on the Memorial Day weekend of 2015, 9 people were inside a vacation house on the Blanco River near Wimberley, about halfway between Austin and San Antonio. The house belonged to the Charba and Carey families. Among their guests were Jonathan and Laura McComb and their 2 children, Andrew, who was 6, and Leighton, who was 4. It was Jonathan and Laura's 10th wedding anniversary. The Blanco came up roughly 5 feet every 15 minutes, 20 feet in an hour. The gauge at Wimberley recorded 40.21 feet and then was destroyed. The Geological Survey later estimated the true crest at close to 45 feet. The previous record on that river had stood since 1929 at 33.3 feet. The house was on stilts. Jonathan McComb described what happened next years afterward, speaking at a church in Corpus Christi. Water went from a foot or so in the garage to 6 feet deep. In his words, that took about 15 minutes. Somewhere in that 15 minutes, Laura McComb called her sister, Julie Shields. What her sister remembers her saying is this: "I am in a house that is now floating down the river. Call Mom and Dad. I love you. And pray." A cypress tree hit the house and knocked it off its foundation. The house went down the Blanco and struck a bridge in Wimberley, and the impact sheared away the second story. Then a tree split what was left of it. Jonathan McComb remembers going under. His words: "At this point, I know that I've lost my friends and my family. I'm underwater. I'm tired. And I don't want to live anymore." He was found about 11 miles downstream with a punctured lung, a broken sternum, broken ribs, cuts, and an injured leg. He lived. So did the family's Labrador. 8 of the 9 people in that house died. Laura McComb, Andrew 6, Leighton 4, whose body was never found, Ralph and Sue Carey, their daughter Michelle, her husband Randy Charba, 42, and their son Will, who was also 4. Julie Shields, afterward, said 6 words about her sister. "I know that she's gone. At least 12 people died in Hays County that weekend. And there was nothing exotic about the storm that did it. It was a Central Texas rain falling on Central Texas ground." There is one more event you need, because it is the template. On the morning of July the 17th, 1987, a church youth group was trying to leave a camp near Comfort on the Guadalupe after a night of hard rain. They were traveling in a caravan, and the way out crossed the river at a low water crossing, a place where the road simply dips down and goes through the water instead of over it. A bus stalled in the crossing. 39 teenagers and 4 adults got out. They linked arms and formed a human chain and started walking toward the far side. The water arrived as a wall and scattered them into the river. 10 of them drowned. 33 were rescued, most of them lifted by helicopter out of the tops of trees they had managed to catch and climb. One of the 10 was never found. The Guadalupe rose 29 feet at Comfort that morning and crested at 31.5 feet. Notice where those children died. Not at the camp, at the road. That is the pattern in this corridor, and it has never really changed. In 1981, on Memorial Day, 13 people died in Austin when Shoal Creek came up, and most of them were caught in cars washed off crossings. In September of 1921, when Thrall was setting its rainfall record, 51 people were confirmed dead in San Antonio, most of them along San Pedro and Alazine Creeks, with water standing about 9 feet deep on Houston Street downtown. That flood is why Almost Dam exists, and why the bend of the river through downtown was rebuilt as a flood control channel that the architect Robert Hugman turned into the Riverwalk. The cities in this corridor have been engineering against this water for more than a century. They have never engineered their way out of it. Now the number that reframes everything. Between 1959 and 2019, 1,069 people died in floods in Texas. That is more than in any other state in the country, an average of about 17.5 deaths a year across 576 separate flood events. More than half of them died in vehicles. And when researchers at the University of Texas at San Antonio mapped where those vehicle deaths happened, the answer was not spread across the state. Counties inside Flash Flood Alley accounted for about 83% of every vehicle-related flood death in Texas. The single highest county in the state was Bexar, with 54. Dallas was second with 44. Travis County, Austin, was third with 37. The 2 cities in this documentary's title are between them first and third. The reason is a piece of infrastructure most people never think about. A low water crossing is a road built to be underwater sometimes. It is cheap. It works almost every day of the year, and there are hundreds of them across central Texas. Austin monitors 67 of them and posts their status publicly. Bexar County monitors 185, with more than 190 automated flood detection stations feeding a public map. Austin has been upgrading these crossings at a rate of roughly 1 every 3 years. At that pace, reporters calculated, it would take the city more than 200 years to eliminate them all. Each one costs from a few $100,000 to several million. The city keeps an internal list of the 20 that most need fixing. And the low spot on the Loop 410 frontage road, where 11 people died in June of 2025, was not on San Antonio's list of low water crossings at all. It had not been classified as one. The instrumented crossings were nearby. The place that killed people was not one of them. That is the shape of the hazard in this corridor, not a river rising through a town, a road that is fined 364 days a year. Texas responded, and it responded fast. On September 5th, 2025, the governor signed Senate Bill 3, directing the state to survey 30 counties from the July disaster declaration, identify the places where outdoor warning sirens were warranted, and require local governments to install and operate them. 2 weeks later, he signed Senate Bill 5, which put $50 million behind it. Grant plans are due by the end of 2026. Then, in the middle of July 2026, it happened again. Rain fell across the hill country for 5 days. Gauges in Uvalde, Kerr, Real, and Guadalupe counties measured more than 20 inches. In Uvalde County, as much as 28 inches fell over 3 days, and 4-day totals there and at Sabinal ranked in federal models as 1 in 1,000 year events. The Guadalupe, at Comfort, crested at 37.08 feet, which is 1.5 feet higher than it crested in 2025. 3 people died. Sirens sounded in the dark. Game wardens moved about 80 people out of riverside campgrounds. A Girl Scout camp on the Sabinal evacuated on a Tuesday afternoon under a flood plan written after the previous year. In Comfort, the volunteer fire department set off its sirens twice, an hour apart, because people were lingering. The assistant chief put it plainly, some people just don't want to leave. That's our problem here. In Kerrville, a resident named Suzanne Sutphin-Schwind described the difference between the 2 years. Last year, we got no alarms. We had no idea what was going on. This year, warnings came about every 2 hours through one night, and her view of that was simple. I think we would all like to err on the side of too much. So the sirens worked. That is true, and it should be said plainly. But look at how that flood was actually shaped. The state climatologist noted that hourly rain rates in 2026 topped out around 4 inches. The year before, 7 to 12 inches had fallen in about 3 hours. A river forecaster described the difference like this. Last year, it all came down at once. This one almost looks like a football game, spread out into quarters. Much of it fell in daylight. It fell downstream of where the worst of the previous year had hit. Upstream, on the stretch of the Guadalupe that had killed so many people 12 months earlier, the river reached about 20.5 feet instead of 37.5. And it was not a holiday weekend, so the visitors who did not know the river were not there. The forecast office was blunt about its own role. From a warning philosophy standpoint, its warning coordination meteorologist said, "There's been no change in how we warn things." Of the 3 people who died in July of 2026, 2 were drivers. Swept away in floodwater in counties with no siren anywhere near them, one of them died on July 20th, 6 days after the worst of it, on a road he chose to cross. That is the part the $50 million does not touch. Sirens are for people who are asleep near a river. They are not for a commuter at 4 in the morning in a low spot on a frontage road. And there is no state program to fix the roads at anything like the speed of the siren program. Senate Bill 3 also did not fund maintenance, which matters, because the automatic alert system installed on the Guadalupe after the 1987 bus disaster was switched off in 1999 when the company that ran it went out of business. The alarm that might have helped had been dark for 26 years by the time it was needed. What actually works is not mysterious. A researcher who studied the town of Comfort found that in 2025, its people survived because they had 4 things at once. Time, because they were downstream, daylight, a working siren tied to a river sensor, and a community already primed to move. Her conclusion was that preparedness has to happen well before the event, because the opportunity to act can close very quickly. That is the whole lesson of this corridor. The escarpment is not going anywhere. The limestone is not going to start absorbing water. 5 million people live along that seam now, and more arrive every week, and every one of them drives across it. The state climatologist gave the closing line himself after the 2nd July in a row. The main lesson, he said, is this sort of thing can happen again, and we won't know when. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this one. These documentaries take a long time to research and put together, and it means a great deal that you watch the whole thing. If you found it worth your time, a like, a comment, or a subscribe genuinely helps more than you'd think. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.